Going for another round with Neil Shepard. And this round, we're going to focus again on energy use. We've already indicated that the energy system is stunningly complex, more complex than I can understand for sure. This time, we're going to talk about the growth of renewables and obviously the stubborn persistence of fossil fuels. You think we can get rid of those in an instant? I don't think so, and that'd be a bad idea for so many reasons. Neil, you want to take over the show from here?
Sure, Guy. Thanks. Let's just get right into it. We've seen a lot of celebration and congratulations in the last few years looking at the growth of renewables from 2010 to 2023. So here's some stats showing that renewables indeed has gone from just about 1,400 gigawatts to 4,000 gigawatts a year. So, threefold increase. And then you look at OECD, which means America and the NATO countries, roughly, and Japan, I think, whoever is the members of the OECD. It means us and not the communists. How about that? And we've grown 42%, but non-OECD, thanks mainly to China. Look at China. Huge growth in renewables. So China's got to be politically correct here. India also growing, and rest of non-OECD together, they make 58%, and that's slightly better. So they've grown their renewables more than us. They're good.
But we're still number one, right?
We're not number one in this chart by any means. We're here in the purple. The Europe is here. They've done a lot. And then rest of OECD. So yes, we're always exceptional here in America.
Right.
Let's look at these three. This is the good news Bible here, Guy, of green energy. We're going to go through it quickly. China added far more clean power than other countries in 2023. Look at China, 279.6 terawatt hours of wind and solar generation. Brazil and India ahead of the United States. At US is 24 terawatt hours. And then you've got the countries of France and Germany. These are countries with, I think, 50 to 75, 80 million people. Spain is much smaller. Australia. Japan has 120 million people, I think. I'm surprised that Japan doesn't have more, but they don't. And the United Kingdom. So wind and solar. And then you've got renewables, this quadrant here in the lower right. Renewables reach 30% of electricity generated worldwide. I mean, that's a story. So here you see renewables, and here, of course, it includes hydro. I said in our last session, you have to be very careful what is included in renewables here. And so obviously hydro is still the big kahuna, but to your point, Guy, hydro is declining because we are actually undamming and dismantling and aging out more dams. The dams are aging out or they're being dismantled for environmental reasons or both. And we see here the yellow is solar, it's growing. Wind, of course, is bigger than solar worldwide, and other renewables is a motley mix of geothermal, biomass, biogas, biodiesel, I think is counted here. So what are your thoughts so far?
Well, by the way, hydropower is a one-time deal. You can dam those rivers all you want, but we aren't making any more rivers.
That's true.
And there's an increasing pressure to remove the dams for a variety of reasons, but one of them is they aren't turning out to be nearly as efficient as people originally thought. And their devastation on natural ecosystems is pretty impressive too.
And the rivers are drying out. We're seeing drought in water flows. Rivers and lakes are supplied mainly by rainwater flowing over land and flowing into those resources. And if there's drought or completely unpredictable cycles of too much rain, and too much rain can't be captured properly by the soil or the water tables or anything. Am I correct in that? Too much rain is not a good thing at one time.
Yes, absolutely. It just runs off and takes a lot of mud and dirt with it. So yes, absolutely.
So we have a climate system that is causing extremes of drought and then rain bombs and storms, which are, people think, well, that's going to always be good, but it doesn't necessarily recharge water resources as effectively as the old normal cycle that's now ruined of the seasons. But then I want to draw your attention to this upper panel here. Fast growing technologies drive electricity demand. So I mean, they put this panel in here. 4 technologies accounted for more than half the worldwide growth in electricity demand. Climate-friendly technologies in green, other technologies in peach, and everything else in gray. And notice the categories. EVs, I guess that's climate friendly. Heat pumps, climate friendly. Air conditioning, not so climate friendly. Data centers, from our last session or two, what did we say about data centers?
Yeah, they require an enormous amount of electricity just to keep them operating.
They
Just
are just adding to demand. I mean, Guy, there's 2 things going on here, many things going on, but 2 major trends are, yes, we're adding renewables. It's good. But the demand, the amount of electric generation that we are requiring, the amount of overall energy that we're using, what is it doing, Guy? Is it steady state? Is it going down? Or is it continuing to rocket up?
must go faster, must have more. Those are our mottos.
Yeah. And then everything else. So, I mean, they make this panel sound like the driving electricity demand is a good thing, but there's several categories here that I don't think are representing a good trend. Air conditioning and data centers, which themselves generate a huge amount of waste heat and waste a lot of electricity, considering that the electricity itself wastes 60% of whatever resource you use to create it. The data centers then create a ton of waste heat. It's a mad, mad, mad world here. So let's keep going. I mean, this is the good news page. Let's just take a step back and look at world energy, all of it. 2024, 73rd edition of the Statistical Review of World Energy. This used to be called the BP, British Petroleum Energy Annual Year in Energy. And I have not gotten to the story of why BP handed this off to a separate institute. But BP, I think 3 years ago, was the last edition of the BP Annual World Energy Review. They stopped doing it, I think because there's a conflict of interest in them reporting on growth of renewables because they aren't doing much for that. And there's a story there, I'm sure, as to why they handed it off to a separate NGO called the Energy Institute. But this used to be the BP Statistical Review of Energy, which is fairly reputable in terms of the petroleum industry. But let's take a look. We're looking here at the black, of course, is coal, 25% or more of the energy diagram here. Oil, 30%. Natural gas, another 20%. Nuclear energy, hydroelectric, and all other renewables as a green sector. And so, renewables are growing. According to the previous panel, they've been growing at a very high rate and particularly contributing to electric power generation and reducing the fossil fuel component of electric power generation. These charts look very similar. I won't go through them in detail, but you can just visually tell. The black is coal. Every one of these regions has black, but notice that Asia Pacific has a huge amount of coal here, whereas the US has reduced its coal, and so has Europe. There's something going on there.
Yeah, we're running out.
Or we're deciding. I think in the US, it's more like we've decided to leave it in the ground. I've read that we actually have spectacular coal reserves in US and Canada, and we're leaving it in the ground. Between you and I, just between us chickens here, that's a good thing, because guess what we're going to have to tap into in 20 years when we run out of the natural gas? We're going to have to go and reopen those coal plants. You heard it here, ladies and gentlemen. Write it.
Or maybe we'll redam the rivers.
We may have to redam the rivers, but I predict that we'll be opening those coal plants. Probably because it'll take 20 years, but someone will actually say, geez, if we're going to keep using fossil fuels, we may as well use that fossil fuel, which also generates enough particulates to slightly counteract the greenhouse effect with the aerosol masking effect. But that's blasphemy to even refer to, right?
Yes, absolutely. Coal is good.
So, these charts, they differ in terms of the coal. But notice that coal in one sentence has moved from North America and Europe to South Asia and China. But we're going to tell the story more effectively just by looking at this. 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. If you just step back and look at this chart, what do you notice? Fossil fuels is about 65%. Nuclear and hydro stay the same. And even though wind and solar and other renewables are growing, the amount of fossil fuel use is growing too. So the pie looks the same for the last 5 years. What's going to change that? Reach some limit.
There are consequences associated with having more than 8 billion people on the planet, and everybody wants more. Nobody has 7 children and says, I think we need to use less in the future.
No one seems willing. It was the case that during the 70s, the oil embargo under Nixon and then Carter, we were told use less energy, heat your house less, turn that thermostat down, drive less, carpool. I don't hear any of those things being told to us now. It's extremely strange that we're not being told to conserve energy. We're just being told to buy or spend money to transition to new devices, junk our old cars, gas stoves, gas water heaters, and other forms of heating, and jump on an electric bandwagon. We're being told to do that, but no one's saying use less energy. They're not even saying insulate your house better, which is a major, major thing that I would advocate. And we've tried to do it. You don't need to do much, and it's not that expensive to improve, take a drafty apartment or house and make it much less drafty. We're not even being told that, Guy. What do you think that is?
That's the first thing we did when we moved into this house, is figure out how to insulate it better. I lived in a straw bale house, essentially zero heat and cooling required, no external cooling required, and a little bit of energy each year, mostly from passive solar, a little bit from burning wood. But nobody's asking us to make those kinds of changes. Again, must go faster, must have more. That's what everybody thinks we have to do, is just get more stuff.
I think it reflects, though, Guy, that the politicians are unwilling to ask anything of the people in this regard. They're too afraid. They're asking them, obviously, to buy electric vehicles and do these other things, but asking them to use less energy, to carpool. Why is that taboo today when it wasn't back in the 70s? I'm convinced there's some sort of psychological and political story there. I don't really know what it is. What are your thoughts?
Well, Jimmy Carter was accused of being somebody who didn't want the United States to grow. And so I don't think anybody's going to go down that road again.
That's heresy.
Absolutely.
He committed a heresy and suggested that we find a way to prosper without demanding continual growth. And that would require a different view of what it means to prosper.
Yes, absolutely. And it cost him an election, and it cost us a sense of idealism in this country, in my opinion.
Very much. This data is, of course, in the upper right, the BP Statistical Review of World Energy. I think this was their last edition in 2022.
Remember when their slogan was BP, Beyond Petroleum?
Beyond Petroleum, I do. I don't think they're using that anymore, are they? I mean, I wonder what the story is there.
No, I haven't seen it for years.
So this is electricity generation in terawatt hours worldwide from 1990 to 2023. I draw your attention to two blips here. This would be the massive recession, 2008, 2009. We did actually reduce very slightly for 6 months or a year. And then, oops, what was it in 2020 that we had? Global pandemic, we reduced. But when you look at the emissions, and you would think that at least those dips, that was degrowth. I mean, a type of degrowth, recessions and pandemic caused a blip in growth. But when you might ask, well, did it cause substantial decrease of emissions? It's hard to tell. This is emissions from power generation worldwide. Note that China's emissions are going through the roof. But we said earlier that China is doing so well on renewables. And indeed they are. They're using coal to generate electric power to run the factories that extrude the aluminum and make the silicon into solar panels, which they're then deploying. And they are spending billions of dollars subsidizing that solar industry so that those panels are so competitive that no US or European maker of solar panels can make a buck. And that's all good because we've asked China to do all our manufacturing for us. Notice that emissions in North America from electric power are going down. The EU is going up. What happened? Well, after Fukushima, Germany decommissioned a number of its nuclear power plants and had to start burning coal again. So EU was on the right track, but then began going up. These are dilemmas, political dilemmas, social dilemmas. Comments, thoughts?
Oh my. I mean, the reduction in emissions, as shown here, again, representing the Great Recession and the pandemic. I don't think they're suggesting that we have more Great Depressions or more pandemics. I don't think anybody in political office would be in favor of either of those strategies. And in fact, I hear every day that the pandemic is behind us, that it's all over, that we have nothing to worry about. And yet I see the statistics on an enormous number of people getting sick and dying on a not very lengthy basis.
True. We did lower emissions for 6 months to a year back in 2009, and then again in 2020, and that was through that Great Recession and the pandemic.
And look how lasting it is.
Yeah, we're rocketing up again, and of course, people want that. They want to be consuming and growing and living the partying just as they were before those unfortunate little kerfuffles in the global growth.
And this other decline going back many years, that must be in the 1970s.
It is. I'm pretty sure it is. 1970. This chart begins in 70, so this would be 78, 79. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
I don't have a full legend on this chart, but it is the case that when we have a recession, there is a cutback in activities and so forth, and it does cause a brief blip of pullback in emissions, as you would expect.
And look how seriously we take that.
Yeah.
It just rockets back up again.
Well, we're crying into our Rice Krispies during those recessions and waiting until they abate so that we can buy that new SUV.
And more Rice Krispies.
Yes. Now, this is from Statista in cooperation with Ember. This is the electric power industry. The legend here is the reverse stack. So the top is coal in dark blue. That's this big blue section, followed by gas, which is this gray section. Other fossil, the light gray. The emissions just keep going up. These are emissions, right? CO2. I don't see that it's going down, Guy. Do you see that emissions are going down at all?
Of course not. That's not what we do.
Global power sector emissions, global emissions from coal-fired electricity generation increased in 2023 to a record high of 9.45 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide. Coal-fired electricity generation accounted for more than 66% of total global power sector emissions. So you're seeing two things. There's never been more renewable energy contributing to electric power generation, but there's also never been more coal contributing to electric power generation worldwide. What a bummer.
There's no such thing as a free lunch, right? You can't have everything that you've come to depend upon in this set of living arrangements and cut back on everything that it took to get us there.
Right. It is also the most polluting fossil fuel, emitting twice as much carbon as natural gas when burned. So I just am not understanding what the celebration is for if we have coal actually growing worldwide. It's not growing in the US. It's growing in Europe only because of two things. Their pullback from nuclear in response and reaction to the Fukushima disaster. That's in Germany. The French are not pulling back. I actually think they're smart about that if you're going to have nuclear and you've already built the plant. And then most recently, they're burning more coal because of this little kerfuffle called the war in Ukraine, which has suspended much of the natural gas that was being sold by Russia to Europe. This is just a distribution of where those emissions come from. We've seen these kinds of charts before. It's included in this, a close-up of it. We don't need to go through this in detail, but the power industry is the largest emitter of emissions.
And not far behind, again, is transportation and industrial combustion.
Right.
And how much control do we exert over those things? I mean, as individuals, can you really make a difference that matters with respect to this chart? I would be surprised.
Not much. I mean, it's so hard. So we end here having looked at the growth of renewables, but the stubborn persistence of fossil fuel. I wish it weren't true. I'm just the messenger. I don't want this to be true, but this is a consequence of hydrocarbon man Homo carbonicus, Homo detritovorus, the civilization that we have wrought, and uncreating that civilization in an orderly, non-chaotic way. I don't know anyone that has a recipe for that. But some form of post-carbon future is in our future. I just don't know how we'll get there and how rough that sled ride will be.
I strongly suspect, given how little effort we have put in on the front end, that it's going to be a pretty rough ride starting in the not too distant future. I'm not exactly looking forward to that, but it is what it is.
It is what it is. All right, we will close for today and at some point have another chapter of this difficult story.
Thank you for putting together all this information so that we can have an informed and enlightened chat about the whole thing.